Good morning, grasshoppers. This coming week, we're going to be doing probably the most fun and most difficult thing in our course, and that is the notion of natural deduction. So, let me, if I may, just give you a sort of brief introduction. We've done conversion of language into symbols, and we've uh, found ways of testing for validity through truth functions, truth tables, and we've used the indirect method for testing validity. And I happen to be a big fan of the indirect method for testing validity because it also tests for invalidity. So if you do the indirect method, you can both test for valid and invalid. Where we're going now is a different mechanism of just deriving validity from the structures of an argument. And the challenge with natural deduction is that it doesn't test for invalidity. It's one of the weaknesses, but in all fairness, the quickness with which you can just determine the validity of an argument through natural deduction is made very evident in the first parts of chapter 7. So what I want to do with you is just sort of work through this brief interview, and then you'll be doing the assignments in both 7.1 and 7.2 Roman numeral 3. So the first thing we have to do is on page 404. They're giving you the first 4 rules: modus ponens, tollens, pure hypothetical syllogism, and disjunctive syllogism. And he does what I consider to be a very good job of explaining and illustrating each one of these 4 argument forms. And the, um, the rules of implication here. So we look at the first rule, for example, and we have the modus ponens here on page 405, and he gives lots of different examples. You'll notice the way that this is set up so that you have your premises, and on the last line of the premises, then to the right you make a slash, and then that's how you state your conclusion. So in the middle of the page, you'll notice that, in each of the premises is lines. So there's 1, 2, 3, however many premises you always want to number them. This is going to be very important. And then you can see here how they're using the modus ponens. Notice at the bottom of the page on 405 that the premises are sort of upside down, and you can still use modus ponens that way. That's very important. Over here on page 406, on the bottom of the page, or they're setting up an argument here: if A then not B, and if C then B, A in the conclusion is not C. So what we're going to be doing is looking at this argument and trying to just ferret out how we can derive that conclusion from this set of premises, sort of like a puzzle. And you are just looking at the different mechanisms using the rules of inference that we have to deduce this. So you can see the argument in the middle of the page. So you sort of look at that and you're going, how am I going to derive not C out of those premises? So at the bottom of the page, he gives you the first step of lines 1 and 3 through modus ponens, you get not B. Over on the next page, so you have to delineate that on line 4. You say, I've got not B, and then you have to justify to the right which lines you're using and which argument form you're using to the right there. So on line 4, to the right, you have lines 1 and 3. That's where you derive that not B from. And then your rule of inference is modus ponens. On page 407, the final step then, once we have not B, then we get not C from modus tollens through lines 2 and 4. And so line 5 is not C. The justification is lines 2 and 4, modus tollens. So you can see we've used two different argument forms, modus ponens and modus tollens, to derive this conclusion. And it's just a matter of having a real good grasp of the argument forms so that you can see that in your head, and then you just do the mechanics, if you will. In the next argument, which is a little more complex, you'll see there are 4 lines of premises, and the conclusion is D. Once again, you're just looking at this argument and you're saying, okay, where is my conclusion? Well, your conclusion is in line 2, so you're going to have to figure out how to get D out of that. And you have to use, one of the rules is you have to use all the premises. So we're going to just sort of work our way through this, and they're showing you on below that for line 5 you get not A through lines 1 and 3, modus tollens. And then once you get that not A, then you can get C or D through lines 2 and 5 through modus ponens. And then once you have C or D, then it's just a disjunctive syllogism from lines 4 and 6. So you can see that the sequence is just a matter of you visualizing the different argument forms, the different rules of implication, and utilizing those to deduce these conclusions out of the argument. The next one here is on page 408, and this middle the middle argument here is a little more complicated. They're using several different rules, and once again you just want to practice with this. You really want to study this section, go over this frequently. But in this particular case, we utilize modus tollens here through lines 1 and 3, and that gives us not F. And then from not F, we can get H through disjunctive syllogisms, line 2 and 5. So you notice that each step has to be chronicled to the right in terms of how you're deriving that, what that line is giving you, and how you're deriving that line. That's very important that you clearly delineate that. So we work through the argument forms. On page 410, he gives you, again, the argument forms, and then he gives you strategies. You want to read through those strategies, and they will be very helpful for you. Once again, it's not my position here to turn you into logicians, as much as I just want you to be very familiar with this stage of natural deduction so that you can use this in what we're doing is a very elementary form of this. You'll notice that there's a whole bunch of the textbook left, and it gets more complicated as we progress, but we're not going that far. We just simply don't have the time in our short class. So we're only doing these first 8 rules, but right now we're just dealing with the first 4. So in exercise 7.1, you have the first 12. I'm looking here at my other screen now. So 7.1, 1 through 12. And I will share with you, I don't want you to be spooked on this. I want you to recognize this is actually pretty easy stuff. And these particular exercises here, they're great practice for you. You want to just take your time and work through each one. So once you get through those, and you want to make sure that you are being patient with yourself, if you will. The next one you're going to look at is 7.2 Rules of Implication 2, and on page 417 he gives you those next 4 rules: constructive dilemma, simplification, conjunction, and addition. So these are just 4 additional rules that you can use to ferret out a conclusion from a particular argument. So we're only going to be working with these first 8 rules. That's what we're going to be doing. And again, he does a very good job of going through each one of the rules and sharing with you what they look like, how they're used, and what you can do with them, and then goes through a particular argument. The use of these 4 rules may be now illustrated, and so now he's going to illustrate those for you on page 418. And once again, if you just take your time and actually work through each of the illustrations that he gives, you're going to see that this is not that hard. It's not that difficult. It's just a matter of going through it systematically, and you have to be creative to look at these argument forms and saying, where is the conclusion? And for example, on page 419, we look at this argument in the top, and we need L or T. And you know that you're going to have to probably utilize a constructive dilemma to ultimately get that line. But you have to work through it systematically. So he does that in the middle of the page and shows exactly how that has to be set up. When you do your work and you submit your work in terms of this week's, that's how it has to be set up. If it's not set up that way, and if you don't justify each line of your premises and your argument and the deduction, then it's wrong. And don't want that. So make sure that you're very systematic and methodical about working your way through these arguments. And like I shared, he does a very good job uh, of affording you how the rules are used. On page 420, he lists the rules again, and then on 421 gives you what I consider to be some very good strategies. Once again, the strategies are just trying to get you to practice with these. You can create your own arguments just to get some practice if you want. But that's basically what we're doing. And my agenda, of course, is just to make sure that you're familiar with this. You don't have to uh, uh, do a lot of sweating and all of that type of thing. But if we look at your next assignment, 7.2, Roman numeral 3 on page 423, just the first 12 problems. And I looked over these again this morning, and they're pretty straightforward. You just have to make sure you take some time. Don't rush through this. And do yourself a favor and don't wait till the last minute and try to work these out. You're going to be a lot better if you systematically go through it, look at some tomorrow. Just get yourself real familiar with the rules, and then work through some of the problems that you have. And what you'll discover is that as you master these, you're actually going to be pretty proud of yourself. You're going to feel really good, like, wow, I did it. And, I've got this. So, this, as I said, is our last week of class. And I think that you've done a pretty good job of working through some of this material. Logic is, as I have shared with you, I don't think is that hard, but it is very methodical and very systematic in terms of its approach and the resolutions. And so what we're into now is deductions. And I just want you to have a nice broad overview of these first 8 rules. The uh, the rest of the rules are pretty much equivalencies. We're not going to be dealing with those again. We just really don't have time. If we were physically in class, then you'd be up at the board working in teams and solving these problems. And what you would find is that the practice at the board, the stuff would just be very clear with you. And you may want to get together with some other folks in the class and actually do that. If you're on campus, you go to a classroom and you get on the chalkboard or the board and work out some problems and things like that, and that can be very helpful for you. We don't have that option here, but your textbook does a very good job of working you through each one of these rules of inference. So, there you go. And I will very much look forward to looking through your work. And there you go. So I hope you have a good week, and I'll talk to you.